everything that we do on the landscape is a novel experiment every time. Like there's no precedent. Every single lever we pull, like ranching in this valley is only, 100 years old? Anything industrial scale or big scale is only 60, 70 years old, 80 years old in this valley. And so like everything we do is having unprecedented novel impacts, and wildlife are responding in novel ways. So like there's no analog future every time we do something. And we've never had a situation where we've fenced off hundreds and hundreds of acres of prime food for wildlife and prime winter range, like class 1 winter range. And those elk don't need all that agricultural area, obviously, but they do need some of that habitat. And so as we fence off the last of that, we could see a large decline in the elk population. But the flip side is we would just need to make some habitat for them somewhere else. We wouldn't necessarily want public land to be turned into a field necessarily, but like that would obviously be a viable approach. Like they want safety and they want food. And so like if you provided that, they presumably would go there, but we could also create more open natural areas with natural forests there, like those elk have used for centuries, and allow them to do that. But we don't necessarily do that. We have a paradigm of mostly forestry focused landscape management, and that doesn't always align with creating winter range for elk, but it could. The dominant prescription is often we need to thin this patch out, and so that is consistent with forestry objective of taking timber or fiber off that landscape, but we just need to do it in a new way and collect information to figure out what that looks like, because again, we haven't been doing that. We don't necessarily know how to do that, but presumably we could. Habitat restoration would be one of the sort of legs of the stool to solve this issue, and it may or may not actually have a huge effect size. Like you'd have to do it and measure it and try. There obviously is bunch grass out there outside of the agricultural areas, and the elk are using it. They don't spend 100% of their time on agricultural areas, but like there's presumably unused open areas as well. So that is where it comes into the safety piece, like from predators and things like that. And so that is more challenging to create off of areas around people. But it's about chipping away at like why are the elk doing what they're doing, and how do we try to provide what they need. And it would be making probably ranches a little less safe for elk. So either hunting or hazing them, so giving them a bit of a hard time on these places, and then making the places off the ranches a little more appealing, so a little safer and a little better food. And you would see a shift in that way. It is as simple as that. Doing those things is not simple, but like the problem is that simple. Yeah, so I think there's the distribution of the entire population in the Rocky Mountain Trench in the winter, which is that combination of risk and food, and ranchers are then feeding these elk over winter or having to push them off their hay as they feed their cows. And then there's the non-migratory behavior piece, and so the non-migratory piece comes into like, why would an elk not wander up into the backcountry in the summer and the spring and the fall? And that of course would relieve a lot of the pressure on ranchers, at least for a portion of the year. And so that also comes down to, we've had 120 years of fire suppression on this landscape, and there's no doubt that this is a fire maintained ecosystem. This is a ponderosa pine and spruce and Douglas fir ecosystem that has short burn intervals that have been extended quite a bit. And a lot of that high elevation summer range is not necessarily in the operable timber base, so it doesn't get logged, which the dominant sort of swap was to swap fire for forestry kind of thing. And there's places like bighorn sheep ranges, where it's steep, or or summer range for ungulates that often doesn't get that same focus because there's not a lot of trees there. But those places are growing in as fire has been excluded from the landscape. And so there is a bit of habitat degradation that's just going slowly chugging along as these landscapes grow in. And then the predator piece, like there's now some ranges with cougars and wolves and grizzly bears on them and potentially less food. And then you have a ranch that has no predators and alfalfa or hay. And so it kind of becomes, you can see how an elk would make that distinction. Good summer range is incredible for ungulates. Like when it's productive, they put on an incredible amount of fat, and so like it is a really important part of their season. And like the dominant idea is that the kind of late summer and early fall is like this critical period for ungulates. And so when they're up in the high country, and if it's productive, it can be like a boon for them. They can do incredibly well. But as these places grow in and the vegetation quality decreases, like there's less of a drive for them to go up there if they're not getting what they need, and especially if there's better stuff in the valley bottom.